Hello and welcome to the first episode of Inside Joseph Campbell with me, Constantine. So we're going to be going through the first chapter of this amazing book, Hero of a Thousand Faces, written by Joseph Campbell in 1948. So we're going to be going through that first chapter, Myth and Dream. What does all that mean? So we're going to break it down into a few different parts. What is a story? Why do we even have stories? The path of self-discovery, and then we're going to try and sort of tie it all up at the end, hopefully kind of bringing everything together. Cool, so I've got you, and I've got my notes, so let's get started. What is a story? So, Joseph Campbell would define a story as interpreting symbols to find a truth. So when we're telling stories, what we're trying to do is we're trying to find something that we understand, relate to, can connect to, and that's kind of the truth that we're looking for. Now, it can be a personal truth, it can be something that affects like just you, or it can be a societal truth. It can be what I call like an objective truth. It can be something that's just true of the world. Let me give you an example. So a personal truth would be like, you watch a movie like The Notebook, and you're like, I felt love, I know what love feels like, so I understand this movie because I felt this thing. I haven't watched The Notebook, I'm just guessing it's about love. So you connect to it on a personal level. The other one would be, let's say you watch a movie like The Big Short, you're watching that movie and you're like, yes, I understand that the financial system in the US is a complete mess. You understand it and you can kind of relate to it on that level. I like to think of it as either being like punched in the heart or being punched in the brain. Like that's kind of how I look at stories, what they're supposed to do. That's kind of like what they're for, is to kind of punch us in the heart and punch us in the brain. So let's look at the interpreting symbols side of it. So, when you're trying to interpret the symbols in order to find the truth, you have to interpret the symbols in the story. I like to think of it as like the story is a roadmap to the truth. So much like a real map, you have symbols on paper that illustrate roads and obstacles and towns and cities, and there's a little key in the corner and that tells you the distance relative to like an inch, right? So being able to understand and like interpret all of those symbols in the right way can lead you to the destination you're looking for. Can lead you to the destination you're looking for and give you a realistic picture of how to achieve that. You're trying to get to Arby's. Arby's is there on the map. Okay, well, because of this map says every inch is a mile. Oh, it's 10 miles away because it's 10 inches away. All of that kind of thing. You got to kind of like interpret it and figure it out. It's the same with stories. All these different symbols exist within stories, and you have to figure out and interpret them in the right way in order to get to the right truth, right? So truth is the destination, and the story is the map. Got it? Cool. So, humans basically have one story that you can tell in an infinite number of ways. There's no one way to tell this story. It's every story just gets put under this like one sort of like substructure or meta structure. But the purpose and the meaning of any kind of story is same cross-culturally. There's always like a purpose to telling stories, and the meaning behind telling stories is the same no matter where you tell it, no matter how you tell it, who you tell it to, yada yada yada. So let me just give you an example of two seemingly completely different things that are basically the same. So Little Red Riding Hood and Die Hard are the same story. What you have is a protagonist who has to leave their home to go and visit a loved one. They go to this strange place to visit the loved one, where they find that their loved one has been taken by an evil doer, right? They then have to kill that evil doer in order to get their loved one back, and then they do that, and they live happily ever after, right? the wolf and Hans Gruber are interchangeable in those stories, as are Little Red Riding Hood and John McClane, as is The Cabin in the Woods and Nakatomi Plaza. They're all the same thing. They're all interacting in the same way, but you tell those stories very, very differently. Now, why do we have stories? What's the point? Well, because human beings are just a collection of stories. We're all just the stories that we tell ourselves. I might tell myself, oh, I'm a gym person. I like to go to the gym. I'm a smart person. I'm usually the smartest person in the room. I'm usually the dumbest person in the room. Oh, I have trouble putting on weight. Oh, I have trouble losing weight. Yada, yada, yada. These are different things that you tell yourself, and you're just a collection of all these narratives that you tell yourself, and you kind of react accordingly. Culture is very much the same thing. Culture is just stories that groups of humans share. So we share this collective story, and we can kind of identify ourselves by the stories that we tell each other. That is what human culture is. And you arrange your society around the stories that you tell each other. Now, where do these stories come from? Well, these things come from like deep in our unconscious. These things like sort of rise up, and you can't really resist them. You can't help it when a good one keeps popping up. So let me give you an example. For me, a big one is that keeps coming up is, hey, clean your bathroom. That is something that happens all the time. So I'll do that and I go, but I don't want to clean my bathroom. I hate doing it. But the thought doesn't disappear. Because I haven't acted on it, because I haven't done the thing I needed to do in order to get rid of that thought, it keeps popping up in my mind and it's irrepressible. So the only way to get rid of that thought is to deal with it, is to act on it. And it's the same with stories. These things bubble up in your unconscious mind. For example, the unconscious thought that comes up in that particular example is, hey, keep your apartment clean. It'll help you to survive. And then my conscious mind interprets that urge as clean the bathroom, right? That's kind of how that goes. Now that we're getting into sort of conscious and unconscious, I'm going to do a quick dive into Freud. Okay, so according to Freud, our stories relate to the fundamental experiences we have with our parents. Now, we're born, as babies, we are born underdeveloped, and it takes us like 20 years to get to a point of independence. Now, during that time, our psychological nature is developed based on dependency to our parents. And our first source of anger and frustration are our parents. So the first kind of things that anger or frustrate us are being separated from our mother. As a baby, if you're separated from your mother, you're separated from your food source. You're separated from the thing that's giving you life. That makes you upset and angry. You don't want to do it, so you start crying. The other thing is stifling our curiosity. So let's say you start wandering about a little bit and you're like, ooh, look at that fire. That's interesting. And you wander over to the fire and then like someone comes and scoops you up and says, nope, that's not for you. And you're like, oh, but I want to see what's going on with the fire, right? Like those are the kind of initial things, those are the first kind of things that frustrate us, which means this kind of quandary where our first object of love, which is our parents, is simultaneously our first object of hostility. Now, the first intrusion to our survival that we feel as a baby is our fathers, because they're the ones who initially separate us from our mothers, right? So our fathers become the first enemy that we encounter in our lives. And now, obviously, as we get older, we forget all of that stuff. We sort of let all that stuff go. We let go our frustration, our hostility towards our father, and we let go of like our sexual impulses towards our mums. Not that those things happen consciously. but that's how that goes. Again, according to Freud. Now, if you don't do those things of letting go of those initial hostilities and stuff like that, you basically are a forever child and you're super creepy. So that's the framework that's the sort of mental framework that Joseph Campbell uses to develop his ideas and theories. Right. So now we have that. Let's look at the path of self-discovery. Cool.